Hello and welcome to the Parker Files, where today we're going to be taking a look at the Hot Toys Spider-Man, MMS 542. This version of the figure comes from the movie Spider-Man Far From Home. If you're new to the channel, there'll be more 6-scale figures and diorama reviews coming your way, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss those. And between now and then, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this figure as well, so please take a moment and leave a comment below. If you're already a subscriber, thank you for stopping by once again and your ongoing support of the Parker Files. For the packaging, while it's a standard release, Hot Toys have given it a DX or deluxe vibe with an upgraded box art, which only makes sense for the upgraded suit Spidey. Since I started collecting Hot Toys, the Guardians of the Galaxy line has always been my favorite box art, but this Far From Home line isn't too far behind. Spider-Man is my all-time favorite character. I mean, why else would I name my son Parker? And while Spidey is my favorite character, Mysterio is also my favorite villain. So for me, the way these two are represented in this artwork together is a masterpiece. The red and black color scheme is intentional and effective on the artwork throughout, but it's the image of Mysterio and the subtle pixelation details that catch your eye initially, and it looks amazing. I love the reflective detail of the dome itself, as well as the haze that is noticeable in certain angles and light. I don't know how they did it, but Hot Toys brought a simple cardboard box and a piece of plastic to life. The back of the box carries the continuity from other figures in this line with some simple lines, but the color scheme speaks to this figure specifically, as do the large and smaller white Spidey logos. Removing the outer slip cover of the box reveals the full Spider-Man image that wraps around the side of the box. This is graphic artwork at its finest, as the image of Spider-Man is vibrant and amazingly detailed. The colors used in the background image complement Spidey's suit colors rather than competing with them, and I love the detail in the exploding drones and the one smaller drone that serves as a preview for what's inside the box itself. On the bottom, we see the full title of this release, as well as Mysterio's symbol and some more subtle pixelation. On the back of the box, along with his symbol, we see some contrasting Mysterio branded coloring, and as always, we get the credits to the cast and crew who bring the upgraded suit Spider-Man to our shelves. Opening the flap reveals a continuation of the artwork and a preview of the figure itself behind plastic. Alright, enough about the packaging, let's open it up and see what's inside. Here we have Spider-Man out of the box, and I have to admit, I didn't want to love this figure, but I do. A lot. As I said, Spider-Man is my all-time favorite superhero, and he has been as long as I can remember. And while I get and can appreciate that this costume design is a callback to Steve Ditko's original artwork in the Amazing Fantasy comic where Spider-Man made his debut, but to me, the Spider-Man I know and love will always be the red and blue suit. And so that, combined with the fact that the tech suit Spidey from the Homecoming film was my first Hot Toy and what got me into 6-scale collecting, those two things made me want to dismiss or dislike this figure from the beginning. But as strong as those feelings and connections are, I can't deny it. I love this figure. That's not to say it's a perfect release or that it doesn't have its flaws, because it does, and I'll try to point them out throughout this review. But overall, I love what Peter Parker did to his suit while listening to Led Zeppelin. So first reactions, before I ramble on, first reactions are high. Starting from the ground up, for reasons I can't explain, the boots are the Achilles heel of this figure. This release has the same issue at the ankles that the original tech suit Spidey had, in that the material gets bunched up between the foot and ankle joint. What's so unforgivable about that is that Hot Toys remedied that issue with the original when they released the movie promo edition of the tech suit. I don't know what they did exactly, but the ankle joints were smooth on that release, resolving the issue. But with this release, Hot Toys took an unnecessary step backwards, and it really is an unfortunate oversight. The articulation in the ankles themselves is great, and the added toe articulation feature accentuates the lifelike poseability, which is a welcomed plus. The red material of the boots and the rest of the outfit is the same material as found on the Tech Suit Spider-Man release, and though the web lines are slightly different, like its predecessor, the boots are nicely and accurately colored and textured, and I love how they look. Like the red portions of the suit, the black material on the legs and upper body is the same as the Tech Suit release, though the print design and textured pattern is different. While I love the Tech Suit Spidey for its classic appeal, I wasn't a fan of the black line overlays on the blue, so this variant of the costume and its sleek aesthetic, it's really working for me. From a distance, it looks like a simple design, but it's only one of Mysterio's illusions because when you look closer, you see the contrasting textured lines, and it's these type of fine details that complete a screen-accurate and realistic look. The issue with this figure, like its original counterpart, is the poseability. Spider-Man is one of the most dynamic figures in comic history, but expressing that with this figure over long periods of time will definitely result in creasing and potential damage. And while the limitations the materials used create are unfortunate, at the same time, they are understandable. It's once again a question of poseability versus screen accuracy, and Hot Toys has always, and seemingly will always, err on the side of screen accuracy. And at the end of the day, this figure is that, without question, especially as you look at the upper body. The minute I saw this release, it took me back to that moment in the film where I saw this upgraded suit for the first time and I thought, yeah, that looks awesome. I had that same impression when I first got this figure in hand. While it looks simple at first glance, the details upon closer look are fine and impressive. The stitching seams on a one-piece outfit like this are a necessary evil, but Hot Toys have done an exceptional job hiding them on this release. They're most noticeable on the back of the figure at the waist section, but that's a small gripe due to the positioning most people will use on their shelves. The thicker black overlays that connect the black sections to the red are sleek and merge the two color sections together nicely. In a similar fashion, the two spider emblems are juxtaposed to perfection. I love the raised spider on the front and how it uses the slightest bit of white as an accent, while the larger spider on the back, though it is the same emblem, is flat and all white with the hex-style pattern overlay. Both of these emblems look stunning in their own right and complement each other and the overall aesthetic sensationally. While the hands are sculpted plastic, they do carry the continuity of the material used in the rest of the suit really well. The black parts of the hands have a textured pattern to them, and the paint app used has a similar sheen to it that creates the illusion that it's all the same material. The red on the fingers accomplishes the same visual deception, and I'm impressed by how much they look like the material on the rest of the suit. And speaking of visual deception, let's talk about a noticeable and notable upgrade in this release. The web shooters on the Tech Suit figure were an attachment that slipped over the wrist joint, which was a bulky yet effective way of covering up that joint. On this release, the web shooters are just a tiny printed white triangle with black accents fixed on top of the material. What's so visually deceptive about this is that the hands themselves actually separate on the inner palm side and allow you to attach the active web shooters and various web accessories to them. We'll see and talk about this later in the video, but what I want to point out here is the trade-off that this upgrade creates. I like that it creates a more sleek and seamless look on the silhouette of the figure as a whole, and while I appreciate that the seams on the hands are basically invisible, what I don't like and what is noticeable because of the web shooters is the unsightly gap at the wrist. It's a little too pronounced for my liking, but more than that, my main issue with this and my long-term concern for this is the material at the wrist is fraying ever so slightly before I've even had a chance to swap out any of the hands. While the joints in the ankles and wrists are sore spots for me, those are quickly forgotten the minute I look at this masked head sculpt. This is iconic and I'm in love with the detail and satisfied by the slight improvement made on this release. The biggest issue most collectors had with the Tech Suit release was the placement of the stitching seam which came down into the forehead of the mask. Thankfully, Hot Toys took note of that error and addressed it with this release. The seam is raised to the top of the head and it's a non-issue for me in terms of placement and visibility. That said, what is visible and hard for me to look away from is the gap between the back of the head and the neck. This is a little too pronounced for my liking and I wish that it sat just a little bit lower. To my eye, the head sits just a little too high and we're on the verge of the dreaded giraffe neck that many collectors talk about. All in all, it's a small gap, and it's a small gripe for this masked head sculpt. The truth is, I can't stop looking at it. I love how it looks, and so, for a rating of this masked Spider-Man head sculpt, I'd give this a 9.5 out of 10. In terms of accessories, as if the packaging didn't fool you into thinking that this was a DX release, the amount of accessories it comes with should. And while we've already gotten a number of these accessories with previous Spidey releases, and while others aren't as functional or usable for me personally, overall, the amount and quality of these accessories exceed my expectations. First up, we see Peter Parker unmasked, and as much as I don't ever see myself posing my Spider-Man like this long term, I have to say, I love how this looks. Starting from the ground up, while this is a slight variant of a standard museum pose, I do want to point out a couple of things quickly. As mentioned previously, no matter how you angle the feet, unless in a dynamic pose, which we'll see a bit later in the video, the material bunching in the ankle joint is unavoidable and unacceptable. It just looks bad. The other thing I wanted to point out here is that even the slightest bit of articulation in the legs causes the material in the pants to crease. Here you see it most noticeable in the back of the legs and up towards the waist. At the end of the day, it is what it is, and each collector will have to make their own decision as to how to pose this figure long term when they get it in hand. Speaking of hands, in this pose we're using two different sculpts. The right hand is more of an open hand, while the hand on the left can be used to hold accessories like the mask, as shown here. All of the hands are equally well sculpted and painted, and like the hands shown initially, they all create the illusion that they're of the same material that the rest of the outfit is in. Unlike the hands, the mask itself is made out of the same material as the red found on the rest of the outfit, and even though it's an accessory we've seen with other Spidey figures, it still is, in my opinion, one of the most usable accessories. No, you can't slide it over the Tom Holland head sculpt, but then again, why would anyone want to? As always, when it comes to Hot Toys, the head sculpt is what gets the praise or causes the biggest commotion in the collecting community, and while the previous version had a few variants across a few releases, it was already really good. In fact, I didn't know it could get any better. And then Hot Toys went out and gave us this. And this is one of those head sculpts that make me wonder how Hot Toys can miss so bad and give us sculpts that barely look like these actors' stunt doubles, and then give us sculpts that level up on a previous 10 out of 10.
Whoa. Nice.
This sculpt is all new and it's flawless. The paint app is as lifelike as you can get, down to the shape of and highlights in his hair and his complexion. I thought the previous version of this head sculpt was already flawless, and yet this one is far superior. I really don't know what else to say. This is Hot Toys once again showing off. This makes my Peter tingle. This is Tom Holland, and so, for a rating of this Peter Parker head sculpt, personally, I'd give this sculpt a perfect 10 out of 10. Staying with a similar pose, here we have Peter Parker with the Edith Glasses, which were a focal point of the Far From Home film. And while Peter didn't think he was worthy of having them bestowed upon him, I'm thankful Hot Toys thought enough of us to provide them with this release. They're a metal wire rim pair of glasses in 1/6 scale size, and they're incredibly detailed. They look as screen accurate as can be in terms of sculpt and paint app. However, the issues I have with these glasses are, one, when you put them on the head sculpt, they look just a little too small in relation to how they looked on his face on screen. And two, when putting them on my figure here, they just sat a little too crooked no matter how much I futz with them. I can't say that this will be an issue for another figure, but it is on mine and something to note. That said, I love that we got these glasses and they're a welcomed accessory, and I can see a lot of collectors taking advantage of them. Here we have Spider-Man in a more dynamic pose, trying to capture that moment toward the end of the film where Spidey was texting with MJ on his way to meet up with her. I loved the innocent teenage vibe of that scene, and the accessories shown here certainly give us opportunity to recreate that moment. But the limitations of this figure don't exactly allow us to keep that moment on our shelves for any length of time. Can you push the boundaries and limitations to achieve it? Sure. But as for me, the long-term concerns I have for this figure aren't worth it. First up, let's look at the lower body. If you've watched any of my previous videos, you know that I don't tend to use stands unless they're for flight poses. And the reason for that is that I personally feel like it takes away from the realism of the figures. And while the stand is needed in this moment for this type of pose, due to the material choice of the suit itself, I think the pressure for the waist grabber could damage this suit over time. The same can be said of the creasing in the legs of the suit. This isn't an overly dynamic pose, and still, the creasing in the legs is already noticeable, and I have no doubt this pose would have long-term repercussions for this figure. Moving up, we see a slight crunch in the midsection, which helps with the overall realism. The left shoulder is raised just enough to create a nice realistic line in the arm, and the bend in the elbow and wrist completes the articulation for his holding the phone. There isn't too much stress put on the suit in the left arm positioning, and I really like how it looks. The size of the cell phone makes it hard to capture a close-up look of it, but suffice it to say, it's incredibly detailed, right down to the text chain between MJ and Peter and the cracked screen. This was an unexpected inclusion, but one I'm glad we got with this release. Alternatively, the web accessory in Spidey's right hand was expected, and of all the web accessories Spidey comes with, this is by far my favorite. All of the web effects are standard fare from previous releases, but that doesn't mean they aren't well done or worth having. Looking down the right arm, you can see the stress on the material at the bend in the elbow, and while the articulation is possible and could be extended further in the shoulder, the materials used once again don't give me the confidence to do so, even for the purposes of posing in this video. Here we have Spider-Man in another flight pose, this time using the web glider attachments. We got a version of these with the tech suit release, but these are significantly bigger and, in my opinion, less useful. They're attached via magnets at the silver sections, and while I appreciate the engineering that's gone into these accessories and Hot Toys' desire to give us multiple options for posing, these just don't work for me. The detail and texture in the design is amazing, and I love how they look in and of themselves. And I also appreciate that they don't put stress on the suit in applying them or the pose required to accommodate them. That said, when attached, they don't fit snug enough to the body for my liking, and they just come across as a little cheap, though they're anything but. So again, while I appreciate the efforts Hot Toys went to give us these wings with this release, they aren't an accessory I'll be taking advantage of in my display. Another accessory shown in this pose is the different eye lenses. Like the web accessories, these are standard fare with every similar Spidey release, but they aren't accessories I tend to use only because of the fragility of the material around the eyes and my concern for damaging the suit. That said, there are 4 different sets of eye lenses, all of which are magnetic, and when used, they add a level of realism to a pose like this that I can see a lot of collectors and photographers taking advantage of. Here we have Spider-Man in another dynamic pose, and I love everything about this look, except that I'll never leave him pose like this. As I mentioned earlier, it always comes back to the question of posability versus screen accuracy. And what sets Hot Toys apart from other collectibles, and the reason why I collect them, is the screen accuracy. But every now and then, especially with a figure like this, I wish there could be more of a balance. Looking at the articulation in the waist and legs, you see once again the stress put on the materials at the joints. And while this captures an incredible amount of lifelike realism, it also creates an incredible amount of creases that will take the life out of this costume over time. I think photographers will have fun getting some amazingly detailed shots with this figure in just a few moments, but like me, most collectors will probably find themselves sticking to slight variants of museum poses the majority of the time. Taking a closer look at the active web shooters, these attachments to the hands are a little tricky to apply as it's done with just 3 small pegs, and though I wish they had made these attachments magnetic, once applied, they're sleek and slick, and I love how they look. When this figure was announced, there was a mystery accessory that was promised, and while I was one of the ones who speculated it would be the Tower Bridge sign that Spidey used as a shield, I was pleasantly surprised it ended up being this miniature drone instead. Because for my personal purposes, it's a far more usable accessory in my display. While it's a lot smaller than the one that we got with the homemade suit release, as you can see, like its larger variant, this drone is equally well sculpted and accurately painted and detailed. I love the fine details of weathering and especially the green lights at the front that let you know that this drone is active. It's attached with its own dynamic pole that attaches to the main flight pole, and I think this looks incredible. And I love the size variation because it gives me the ability to create depth in my display, which will really come in handy when Mysterio is finally released, along with a 3-pack set of drones, of which 2 are smaller like this one here. I'm really looking forward to those 2 releases and the display options that they will afford. Out of all the characters in the MCU, Marvel, and other superhero properties, Spider-Man has always and will always be my favorite. And while I'm a purist at heart and will always lean towards the classic red and blue version of his costume, and even though I have a sentimental attachment to the tech suit Spidey because it was my first figure and it has that classic vibe, I have to say, while this isn't my favorite Spider-Man figure we've gotten to date, it is, at least in my opinion, by far, the best Spider-Man figure we've gotten to date. Yes, there are a few limitations with this release due to the materials used, and yes, the joints and the ankles and wrists are eyesores, but the improvements made over previous releases in the seam on the mask and the Tom Holland head sculpt, as well as the inclusion of a number of incredibly detailed and usable accessories, all of these make this Spider-Man, in my opinion, the best Spider-Man release to date and a welcomed addition to my shelf. No matter what he does, no matter what he looks like, J. Jonah Jameson will never be a fan, but this suit has won me over. And so, all in all, after looking at Spider-Man and everything he comes with, I'd rate this figure a total 9.5 out of 10. I hope you've enjoyed this video and that you want to stay tuned for more. If so, take a second and hit that subscribe button. There'll be more 6-scale figures and diorama reviews coming your way. Until then, stay safe and collect because you can.